The federal government of Nigeria, the United Nations, partner organizations and civil society dedicated the entire month of March to commemorate the strength, resilience and achievements of Nigerian women, while also highlighting persisting challenges of achieving gender equality during the International Women's Month, globally and annually too. The 8th of March celebrated as International Women's Day in recognition of the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women. On Diplomatic Ties, we shall be looking at generation equality, raising women's rights. My guest is a lady with the track record of working to promote women's rights and gender equality in Africa and globally, Comfort Lamptey. She's the UN Women Representative to Nigeria and ECOWAS. The program continues shortly. Stay with us. Once again, thanks for joining us on Diplomatic Ties today.
Thank you very much for having me on your program.
To the crux of the matter, generation equality, raising women's rights. What is it all about?
Realizing women's rights.
Okay.
So this year, as you may know, is a very significant year on the global women's rights calendar because this year is 25 years since the world convened in Beijing, China, to adopt the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. It was at the time, and still is, one of the most progressive blueprints for women's rights the world over. And it was in Beijing, China that we coined the adage, women's rights are human rights. So we are marking 25 years, and as UN Women, we have decided that it's important to focus on the role of young women as we move forward with this work. You know, 25 years ago, we had another generation of women at the forefront of advocating for change. And we have made some progress, but I think overall progress hasn't been as fast as we would like it to be. But this year is a year for us to take stock of how far we have come, look at the work that still remains ahead of us, and then look at those who can help us drive this agenda going forward. Hence the emphasis on young women, and so generation equality actually speaks to the need for the older generation of women who were in Beijing 25 years ago coming together with the young generation of women today to work together to really push this unfinished business of promoting women's rights and gender equality.
You've been in Nigeria for upwards of about a few months, over 2 years, right? Mm-hmm. What has been your experience working in Africa and being in Nigeria comparatively?
So my experience of working on issues of women's rights and gender equality in Nigeria are that, you know, like in many African countries, we've made progress on some fronts. We have strong, capable, competent women in Nigeria, as we do in other parts of the continent. But we also have very real barriers to progress. Our barriers are institutional, they are cultural. Patriarchy is one of the biggest barriers that we have to progress. But we actually have an able leadership of women who can drive change and make this continent a better place, make Nigeria a better place. So I'm hopeful because I believe that the women are not relenting in their efforts to drive change. Increasingly, we're also getting some men coming on board to support this effort. And so I believe that the future will be better. But clearly we have a lot of challenges here in Nigeria and across the continent. And certainly from our standpoint as UN Women, these are not challenges for women. There are challenges for development. There are challenges for the continent. And so our work is to support the government, to support the constituencies, the progressive constituencies in Nigeria, who really see that empowering women, bringing women into the development space is something that will help advance the interest of Nigeria overall.
Looking at the space you're supposed to function within, Nigeria and ECOWAS, how are you coping?
Well, I think I've been very fortunate to have a good team to work with. I mean, I think in the UN also we uphold all the principles that we're fighting for here. We have a very dynamic Minister of Women's Affairs who's also a good partner to work with. We have government, parts of government which are really also committed to this agenda, and a very strong civil society movement of women's organizations as partners, and then other international partners as well. So I think this work is a joint effort, it's a team effort, and I feel that I'm able to do my work because there is a progressive community of people who are also working in the same direction, and most especially Nigerians and young women, especially in this age of generation equality, who are also driving the agenda. But certainly no illusions about the nature and the urgency of the work that has to be done still in Nigeria, whether we're looking at the economic empowerment of women, whether we're looking at violence against women, which is a huge problem, whether we're looking at education of girls, with so many girls out of school or being married early, whether we're looking at women's health. So definitely the challenges are enormous, but I think we're building a constituency and a community of like-minded progressive advocates that exist in Nigeria to really bring about the needed change going forward.
Now, you work within what we call an abstract terrain that comes face to face almost on a daily basis, weekly basis, all through the year, issues of stigmatization. Comparatively, Africa, Nigeria, West Africa, and other parts of the world where you've worked, how do you compare that? Tied to women issues.
Well, if I take the issue of violence against women, I think oftentimes what we see, for example, is that there's a lot of underreporting of incidences where women's rights are violated, sexual violence being one case in point. Women are normally reluctant to report when they have been victims of sexual violence. Why? Because sometimes they are stigmatized. They may not be believed. They are asked whether it's their fault, whether it was what they were wearing, whether they were the ones who brought this upon themselves. So stigmatization is real, and I'm using the case of gender-based sexual violence to illustrate that. But it's not just in Africa. You see these same sentiments being expressed all over the world in this day and age. So you find that oftentimes women don't want to be doubly victimized, so they may not, because of fear of stigmatization. But part of what we do also is to educate women to speak out and to educate populations to believe women when they do speak out, and to provide support to women who have been victimized. So in terms of working on gender issues and issues such as gender-based violence, stigmatization is real, but it also comes with the education to change the understanding and the mindsets of people who are too quick and too easy to judge and don't actually understand that irrespective of what a woman wears or where she goes, that nobody has the right to violate her. And that if a woman is violated, what society, what her family and the community overall have to do is to support her to recover rather than stigmatize that woman. So stigmatization really is ever present, but we see that it is something that women face, not just here in Nigeria, but everywhere.
Do you think an appropriate legislation will be at the UN front, AU front, ECOWAS front could be of help?
Well, we do have legislation. You know, one of the things that we have
maybe
done
in terms of implementing, not just legislation.
Right, and that tends to be the challenge. So in this era of marking 25 years of the Beijing Declaration, for instance, we have worked with governments the world over, regional bodies, to look at progress, and that progress has also reviewed policies and legislations that are in place. And one of the areas we see that there's been most progress all over the world is on legislation. So more governments than ever before have adopted legislation, including legislation to protect women against violence and so on. But what we see, and even Nigeria has, you know, through the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015. What we see, though, is the challenge is that of implementation. So in Nigeria, only 7 states have domesticated this legislation. Now, once you adopt a legislation, you domesticate it, you have to have an action plan to actually translate it into implementation. And then you have to put resources to it. And that's where we see that there still remains gaps, because it's not enough for government to adopt legislation. They must have plans to implement those legislations, and they must put funding to that. So that is the next frontier, so to speak, in terms of the advocacy.
Besides that, what are you doing about advocacy within the thematic areas, which in one of your sessions you hinged on them, in terms of women and poverty, education for women, women and health, violence against women, women and armed conflict, women and the economy, women governance, power and decision making, institutional mechanism for the women, women and human rights, women in the media, women and the environment, the girl child. How are you doing the advocacy? Because you need enough media space to do this. What plans do you have?
So the areas you read out are part of the 12.
I have to pick them out copiously.
They're the 12 critical areas of concern which were highlighted in Beijing, China, 25 years ago as priority areas. And well, unfortunately, they still remain priority areas, because we still have not made as much progress in some areas than not. But what we do is to support government. So around all of these areas, there are opportunities to adopt particular legislations. There are opportunities to expand programmatic areas of focus. If I take the area of women and armed conflict, for instance, you know, in 25 years ago, we were talking about women in armed conflict. Today we talk globally about women, peace and security. And it was advocacy from that period 25 years ago that led the world in 2000 to adopt for the UN Security Council to adopt for the first time a resolution on women, peace and security. You know, prior to that, the Security Council didn't think that issues such as women in conflict were matters for the Security Council. It was actually contested. So that victory alone was part of the advocacy efforts of women's organizations around the world, with support of the United Nations, to make sure that actually the Security Council discusses issues of women. And out of that have come plans of actions that governments have adopted. Nigeria has adopted that National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, in fact, a second generation of that action plan. And we are also this year marking 20 years since the Security Council adopted this resolution. So when you look at addressing the conflict in the Northeast, and a lot of the advocacy and the work about putting women front and center, that has also been a result of the advocacy. That's just one example.
We get bothered about how you penetrate the barriers in terms of nationally determined objectives, country by country, besides even the sub-regional, say ECOWAS, Africa, maybe, and the globe. We find some obstacles in what you're doing in terms of the mores, the norms. How are you penetrating these barriers?
So that's a real challenge, because, as you know, cultural norms and traditions are often times some of the hardest things to change, because people hold on to their traditions and their norms. But we also know that these traditions and social norms are not static. They change, and so part of our work is to also appeal to, advocate and build partnerships with non-traditional partners, such as the traditional leaders. And, as UN Women, we've been doing a lot of work in the last few years, bringing traditional rulers, traditional leaders, and religious leaders to actually engage with us on the issues around ending child marriage, ending harmful traditional practices for women, gender-based violence. And we are actually seeing that there's a whole community of traditional leaders out there who are willing to work with us. So we are going to using those avenues also to try to foster change. It's a long-term engagement in really trying to help people to see that norms and traditions will need to also be interrogated, so that where they discriminate against women's rights and gender equality and progress for the society, that we can make the necessary changes.
Let me deviate a bit. We know Ebola came and left, and now the entire world is confronted with coronavirus, COVID-19 for short. What are you doing within your plank regarding maybe awareness creation, compliance, safeguards? Let me be specific on women.
Okay, so as you know, the COVID-19 started in Asia, in China, and we've actually, in the last couple of weeks, managed to learn a lot from our counterparts, our colleagues in the Asia region, around the gender implications of this virus. In any crisis situation, we always see that oftentimes gender inequalities are exacerbated. We know that in the world, WHO estimates that over 70% of healthcare workers and social workers are women. So women are actually at the front line of this, in terms of providing support to those who are affected, but also they are also then at further risk themselves. We know that the implications of the COVID-19, schools shut, people staying at home, creates all kinds of additional burdens for women, because women do 3 times the amount of unpaid care work than men, and so when children are not at school and women have to care for family members who are also at home, they have more on their plate. What we're also learning from the Asia region is that incidences of domestic violence against women actually increased in China during the crisis there. So we're also mindful of that and looking at advocacy to ensure that women can be better protected as healthcare workers, so that they have the personal protection equipment that they need. Women can be protected in their homes, and that the work that we're doing under Generation Equality, which is reduce the unpaid care burden on women, now we're seeing this actually even exploding with the COVID-19. So there are a lot, and economically too, many women are in very insecure, informal sector parts of the economy, and so they are going to be very much hard hit by the economic consequences of the COVID-19. So yes, the gender dimension of this problem is real, and we need to make sure that the support that is being given, and we're really acknowledge the work that the Nigerian government is doing, but that in terms of safeguarding jobs, we need to also protect jobs for women going forward.
Let me ask you maybe a common sense question. You've been in advocacy by your profile, not just in Africa, but the entire globe, and you've gone around. And one would want to ask, would you say it's a wasted effort?
No. If it is, I would have packed my bags and gotten out of this work a long time ago. But I do believe that whatever I am doing, what we're doing, it's a long-term investment in trying to make the world a better place, bring about change. And change doesn't happen easily. You know, people don't shift their attitudes and their ways of doing things easily. We're trying to create a more equal world when we're working for gender equality. That means that women have to change and men have to change too, and that is where the challenge comes. And it is about sharing power and sharing opportunities. And so there's a lot of resistance, no doubt, in doing this kind of work. Some of the resistance is passive, some of it is more open. But I do believe that every investment that we make is actually part of the building blocks of making the world a better place. So no, it's not a wasted effort. I believe it's a long road, but we will do our part, and those who come after us will also do their parts. But that's the path we have to. There were those who went before us, and we're building on what they did. And ultimately the goal is to make the world a more equal one and a better place for men, women, and boys and girls too.
Well, others operate within the ambit of, say, let's say China in billions, India in billions, and Nigeria is talking about the 200 millions. Now, I want to ask this. Nigeria is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and a secular state. How has it been working in Nigeria in terms of the complexities you find, penetrating the barriers, all that?
Well, but
Let
I
me
think
ask differently now.
I think those are the things that also, those are
Is there
also
anything unique about
opportunities.
Nigeria?
Those are all opportunities for Nigeria, for its greatness, you know, as the giant of Africa. I do believe that there's strength in diversity, and I believe that diversity is a great thing. So if we are not exploiting our diversity to create divisions, but we actually embrace our diversity, you know, to create opportunities, then that's a great thing. And I see Nigeria, it's 200 million, but it's the most populous for us here in Africa. But you know, the energy of 200 million people, mainly young people too, that is an asset. So it's how we take it, and then the diversity in religion, in ethnicity, those are all things that can be harnessed to promote the culture, the tourism, the economy, you know, in so many ways. So I see these things as opportunities. Of course, in our current context, they are represented sometimes as opportunity, as challenges, and we do see challenges in managing all of these different elements. But I do think that in the long run, they are more opportunities than challenges, and it's been an honor for me to be serving in Nigeria, in a country that has this level of diversity, variety, complexity. I think it's a great opportunity, and I feel very fortunate to be serving here.
Okay. 25 years, that is post Beijing conference. In the area of politics, specifically, would you say you have covered a good mileage?
No. I think globally we see this as one of the areas that where progress has been very slow. So of course we say 25 years, what have we done? We have achieved some things, but progress has been slow. And in the area of politics, that's one area where this is most reflected. Globally now we have women representing about 24% of parliaments. So not great, because we are looking at Beijing. Actually, the objective was to have a minimum representation of 30% women. That's what Beijing upheld as the critical mass. You need at least 30% representation of women in any context to be able to bring change, and we haven't reached that. That was 25 years ago when we set that as a minimum target. Today, the AU has challenged Africans to have 50% representation of women. Where are we in Nigeria? We're under 5%. So clearly, this is probably one of the worst performing areas for Nigeria, and we need legislation. If you look around the world, you see that the countries that have made progress in overcoming this challenge of representation of women in politics, what has made the difference is that they've adopted legislation, affirmative action legislation, parity legislation, but they have legislated this. And I think for Nigeria, if we're going to wait on the goodwill of members in the National Assembly to actually, or the public widely to vote women into power, we will be waiting a long time. So we need to have the legislation so that we can guarantee a minimum representation of women in politics.
Well, looking at the 12 critical areas of concern, we'll not have all the time, but let me leave it here at this time. But to say, Comfort Lamptey, UN Women Representative in Nigeria and ECOWAS. It was nice talking with you on diplomatic ties.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we hope and believe that truly the generational equality and realizing women's rights is just by the corner to be achieved.
We hope so too. We believe that. That's why we are driving this campaign.
That's it on Diplomatic Ties today. We looked at generational equality, realizing women's rights, and my guest, as you know, is the country representative of UN Women in Nigeria and ECOWAS. That's not the program. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.